I watched my ex-husband's face go white across the conference table. "Your Honor, we must object," his attorney said, half rising from his seat. "Ms. Chen signed a confidentiality agreement. She is legally barred from discussing any matters related to Mr. Peterson." The judge interrupted, her voice crisp with irritation. "Your client's company is under federal investigation for securities fraud, patent theft, and violations of FDA regulations. Ms. Chen has been subpoenaed by this court. The confidentiality agreement is not valid when testimony is compelled by law." I let myself smile then, just a little. 4 years ago, in my first life, I'd sat in a different conference room and signed away my rights to ever tell this story. I'd taken their $50,000 settlement, their NDA bound in leather and stamped with gold foil, and I'd watched Marcus Chen walk away with everything I'd created. I'd watched him build a pharmaceutical empire worth $3 billion on my research. I'd watched him marry my best friend 6 months after our divorce. I'd watched from the outside as they lived in penthouses and gave TED Talks and accepted awards for innovation. I'd watched until the cancer killed me at 34, broke and alone in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. Then I woke up on my 28th birthday, 6 years in the past, with Marcus's arm around me and the smell of the birthday pancakes he'd made, and I knew exactly what was coming. But this time, I knew how to make them pay. "Ms. Chen," the judge said, nodding at me, "you may proceed." I took a breath and looked directly at Marcus. His new wife, my former best friend Julia, sat beside him, her hand on his arm. She'd worn Chanel to the deposition. I remembered that suit. I'd helped her pick it out in my first life, back when I'd still thought she was my friend, before I'd come home early from a conference and found her in my bed. "My name is Dr. Samantha Chen," I began, my voice steady. "I hold a PhD in biochemistry from MIT, where I graduated summa cum laude. In 2019, I began research into a novel treatment for glioblastoma, a particularly aggressive form of brain cancer. The treatment utilized a combination of targeted gene therapy and immunotherapy that had never been attempted before." Marcus's lawyer was frantically typing notes. Let him type. "I met Marcus Chen during my postdoctoral work. He was getting his MBA at the time. We began dating and eventually married in 2020. He had no scientific background whatsoever. His degree was in business administration." "Objection," Peterson said. "Relevance? I'm establishing the witness's credentials and relationship to the defendant." The prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah Kim, said smoothly, "It's foundational." "Overruled. Continue, Ms. Chen." I took a sip of water. My hands didn't shake. In my first life, they'd shaken constantly during those final months. The lawyers had made me feel small, stupid, hysterical. They'd called me bitter, unstable. A woman scorned who couldn't accept that her husband was the real talent. This time, I had the truth, and I had the law on my side. "I worked on the treatment for 3 years, I continued. "I conducted the research in our home laboratory, a space I'd set up in our garage. Marcus knew about the work. He saw the results. In early 2023, I had a breakthrough. The treatment worked. In mice, it eliminated glioblastoma tumors with a 94% success rate and no significant side effects." I pulled out the first folder. Sarah had organized everything beautifully. "These are my original lab notebooks," I said, sliding copies across the table. "You'll note they're dated, signed, and witnessed. Every entry is in my handwriting. Every experimental result is documented. The signature breakthrough is dated March 15th, 2023. Marcus was staring at the table now. He knew what was coming. He had to know. "On April 2nd, 2023, I told my husband that I was ready to move forward with filing patents and seeking funding for human trials. I was excited. This was going to change everything, for cancer patients, for our future, for everything." My voice caught just slightly, not from sadness this time, from rage. That night, we celebrated. He took me to our favorite restaurant. He told me how proud he was. He made love to me and told me I was brilliant, that this was our dream coming true together. Julia shifted in her seat. Good. Let her squirm. The next morning, I woke up and found that my research files had been copied from my computer. All of them. 3 years of work, every data file, every photograph of results, every protocol document. Marcus had used my password, which he knew because we were married, to access my computer while I slept. Objection! Peterson was on his feet now. This is speculation. The witness has no proof. I have digital forensics, I said calmly, pulling out another folder. The files were copied at 3:47 a.m. on April 3rd, 2023, from my laptop to an external drive. The metadata is all here, the timestamp, the device ID, everything. I also have security camera footage from our home system showing Marcus in my office at that exact time. That was new. In my first life, I hadn't thought to check the security cameras until it was too late, until Marcus had convinced me to delete the cloud storage to save money. This time, I'd downloaded everything the morning I woke up reborn. I had copies of copies stored in 3 different countries with instructions to release everything if anything happened to me. Peterson sat down slowly. On April 5th, 2023, Marcus filed provisional patents for the treatment, I continued, in his own name. The filing listed him as the sole inventor. He used my research, my data, my protocols, everything I had created, and he claimed it as his own work. That's a lie, Marcus said suddenly, his voice hoarse. Sam, you know that's not how it happened. We worked on it together. Mr. Chen, the judge said sharply, you will have your opportunity to testify. Right now, Ms. Chen has the floor. I looked at him, really looked at him. In my first life, I'd loved this man so much that his betrayal had broken something fundamental in me. I'd spent years wondering what I'd done wrong, how I could have been so stupid, why I hadn't been enough. Now, I just saw a mediocre man who'd gotten lucky enough to marry someone brilliant and arrogant enough to think he deserved credit for her work. We did not work on it together, I said quietly. You have a bachelor's degree in business administration, Marcus. You don't have a single publication in biochemistry. You've never conducted independent research. You couldn't explain the mechanism of action of my treatment if your life depended on it. I pulled out more papers. After Marcus filed the patents, he immediately began shopping the research to pharmaceutical companies. He used my data to create pitch decks. He used my results to attract investors. And he used my best friend, Julia Martinez, who worked in pharmaceutical sales, to make connections. Julia's perfectly made-up face had gone blotchy. She'd been so smug in my first life, so confident that she'd won. She'd sent me a Christmas card the year after they married, her and Marcus in matching sweaters in front of a massive tree, her hand on her pregnant belly. The card had said, wishing you happiness and new beginnings. I'd thrown it away, but the image had burned itself into my brain. I didn't know about the patent filing until May 2023, I said. I came home early from a conference. I was supposed to be presenting some preliminary findings, but I'd gotten food poisoning and decided to come home a day early. This was the part that still hurt, even now, even with all my preparation and planning. I found Julia and Marcus in our bed, together. The court reporter's fingers paused on her keyboard for just a moment. When I confronted them, Marcus told me that he'd been having an affair with Julia for 8 months. He told me he was in love with her. And then he told me that the patents were in his name, that he'd already secured $50 million in Series A funding for a company called Chentech Pharmaceuticals, and that if I tried to claim any credit for the work, he would bury me in legal fees. Jesus Christ, someone muttered from the gallery. The judge shot them a look. I was in shock, I continued. I didn't understand how this had happened. Marcus told me that I could either sign an NDA and accept a $50,000 settlement, or he would drag me through a lawsuit that would take years and destroy my reputation. He said no pharmaceutical company would ever work with me if I became known as a difficult ex-wife making false claims. He said I'd never work in the industry again. My hands clenched in my lap, hidden under the table. He also told me that Julia was pregnant with his child, that they were getting married, that I needed to move on with my life and stop being pathetic. I heard Julia make a small sound. When I glanced at her, there were tears on her face. Performance tears, probably. She'd always been good at those. I signed the NDA, I said flatly. I took the $50,000. I moved into a studio apartment in Queens, and I watched Marcus and Julia build an empire on my work. Sarah Kim leaned forward. Ms. Chen, can you describe what happened to Chentech Pharmaceuticals after you signed the NDA? This was the part I'd been waiting for. Chentech went public in 2024, I said. The IPO valued the company at $1.2 billion. Marcus became CEO. Julia became Chief Operating Officer. The treatment I developed, which they rebranded as Chentech Molecular Therapy, or CMT, went into human trials in late 2024. I pulled out more documents, news articles, SEC filings, trial results. The trials were initially successful, I said. The treatment worked exactly as I'd predicted it would. Patients with glioblastoma saw significant tumor reduction. Marcus and Julia did interviews. They appeared on morning shows. They were featured in Forbes, Fortune, Time Magazine. Marcus gave a TED Talk about innovation and perseverance. My voice was getting harder now, sharper. But there was a problem, I said. Marcus didn't actually understand the science behind the treatment. He'd stolen my protocols, but he didn't understand the underlying mechanisms. So when the FDA asked for modifications to the trial design, when they raised questions about long-term safety data, when they wanted additional animal studies, Marcus didn't know how to respond. Peterson was making notes frantically now. Marcus had gone very still. More importantly, I continued, Marcus cut corners. In my original research, I'd been very careful about dosing protocols, about patient selection criteria, about monitoring for adverse effects. But trials are expensive, and Marcus was under pressure from investors to move quickly. So he loosened the criteria. He increased the doses to try to get more dramatic results. He reduced the monitoring protocols to save money. And what happened as a result? Sarah asked. People died, I said simply. The room went completely silent. In Phase 2 trials, 5 patients died from complications related to the treatment. The official reports blamed underlying health conditions and disease progression. But the truth is that those patients died because Marcus didn't follow proper safety protocols, because he didn't understand the science well enough to know what he was doing. I pulled out another folder. This one was thick, and the papers inside were marked with sticky tabs. These are the original trial protocols I designed, I said. You'll note that they include specific exclusion criteria. Patients with certain genetic markers were not supposed to be eligible for the treatment because my animal research showed they had adverse reactions. Marcus's trial protocols didn't include those exclusions. 3 of the 5 patients who died had those exact genetic markers. Where did you obtain these trial documents? Peterson demanded. If you were under an NDA, I obtained them through a Freedom of Information Act request, I said calmly. Clinical trial data is public record once trials are registered with the FDA. I didn't violate any confidentiality agreement. I simply read the publicly available documents and compared them to my own research notes. That was a lie, actually. In my first life, I'd been too broken to do any of that. I'd just suffered in silence until the cancer killed me. But this time, when I'd woken up on my 28th birthday, I'd spent the first week doing nothing but planning. I'd mapped out every single thing I knew was going to happen. Every betrayal, every theft, every shortcut Marcus would take. And then I'd figured out how to use it all against him. The FOIA request had been step 1. I'd filed it as soon as Marcus's trials were registered, long before the deaths occurred. I'd documented everything, and then I'd waited. Ms. Chen, Sarah said, did you take any action after learning about the deaths in the clinical trials? Yes, I said. I contacted the FDA anonymously and provided them with my original research protocols. I explained that the current trial design deviated from the original research in ways that could be dangerous. I suggested they conduct an audit. Peterson shot to his feet. Your Honor, the witness is admitting to interfering with a federal clinical trial. The witness is admitting to reporting potential safety violations to the appropriate regulatory agency, Sarah countered, which is not only legal, it's the ethical obligation of any scientist who becomes aware of such violations. Overruled, the judge said. Continue, Ms. Chen. I nodded. The FDA did conduct an audit. They found multiple violations. The trials were suspended in February 2025. Chentech's stock price dropped by 60% in a single day. The company is currently under investigation by the FDA, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. And is that why you're here today? Sarah asked. Yes, I said. I was subpoenaed to testify about the origins of the treatment, the original research protocols, and the deviations made by Chentech during their clinical trials. because even though I signed an NDA, I cannot refuse to testify when compelled by a federal subpoena. I let myself smile again, wider this time. The NDA specifically states that I cannot voluntarily disclose information about the treatment or my work with Marcus, but it doesn't prevent me from testifying when legally required to do so. Marcus's lawyers wrote the agreement themselves. They should have been more careful about the loopholes. Marcus was staring at me with something like horror. Good. So let me be very clear, I said, leaning forward. The treatment that made Chentech Pharmaceuticals worth billions of dollars is mine. Every single aspect of it, from the initial concept to the final protocols, was created by me. Marcus Chen contributed nothing except betrayal and theft. He stole my research, filed fraudulent patents, built a company on my work, and then endangered patients by implementing my treatment without understanding the science behind it. That's not true, Marcus said desperately. Sam, please, we can work this out. We can... Mr. Chen, the judge said icily, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. I kept going. I was on a roll now, and years of suppressed rage were finally finding their outlet. I can also testify about the financial fraud, I said, because while I was conducting my FOIA requests and monitoring the trials, I also did some research into Chentech's financial statements. I pulled out yet another folder. Sarah and I had prepared this so carefully, organized everything so perfectly. Chentech's SEC filings claim that the company spent $45 million on research and development in 2024, but the actual research had already been completed by me in my garage on a shoestring budget. So where did that $45 million actually go? Peterson looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't figure out what to object to. I cross-referenced Chentech's expenses with various LLCs and consulting companies, I continued. It turns out that $23 million of that research and development budget went to companies owned by Marcus's family members. His brother's consulting firm received $8 million for consulting services. His father's biotech equipment company received $50 million for laboratory equipment that was never actually purchased. The equipment listed in Chentech's inventory doesn't exist. Julia had gone pale. She'd signed off on those expenses. As COO, she would have approved them. That's fraud, I said pleasantly. Securities fraud, to be specific. Chentech was lying to investors about how their money was being spent. The company was being used as a vehicle to funnel money to Marcus's family, while the actual scientific work, my work, was being botched. Do you have evidence of these allegations? The judge asked, and she didn't sound skeptical. She sounded interested. Yes, Your Honor. I have copies of the SEC filings, the incorporation documents for the various LLCs, the wire transfer records that I obtained through, I paused delicately, additional FOIA requests related to the investigation, and testimonial evidence from a whistleblower who worked in Chentech's accounting department. That whistleblower was me, of course. Or rather, it was a carefully crafted anonymous tip I'd sent to the SEC 6 months ago, complete with a burner email and a VPN. But they didn't need to know that. I also have evidence of insider trading, I added. In the week before the FDA suspended the trials, Marcus, Julia, and several Chentech board members sold significant portions of their stock. Marcus sold $45 million worth of shares. Julia sold $12 million. The board members collectively sold another $67 million. That's not insider trading, Peterson said quickly. Those were pre-planned sales. Pre-planned sales that coincidentally happened the week before a stock crash? I asked sweetly. Sales that were made after Marcus received preliminary communications from the FDA expressing concerns about the trial results, but before those concerns were made public. That's the definition of insider trading, counselor. Sarah was practically glowing. She'd been prosecuting white-collar crime for 15 years. And I'd just handed her the case of her career on a silver platter. Ms. Chen, Sarah said, I'd like to enter into evidence these documents you've referenced, the original research notebooks, the patent filings, the trial protocols, the SEC filings, the financial records, and the stock sale records. I'd also like to request that the court grant me permission to pursue additional charges of securities fraud, insider trading, and patent fraud against Marcus Chen and Chentech Pharmaceuticals. So granted, the judge said. Mr. Peterson, does your client wish to make a statement at this time? Peterson leaned over to confer with Marcus. I could see Marcus's hands shaking. Julia was crying openly now, mascara running down her face. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Your Honor, Peterson said finally, his voice strained, we would like to request a recess to consult with our client. Granted, the judge said. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Ms. Chen, you're still under subpoena. Please make yourself available for further testimony. Of course, Your Honor, I said. As the judge left, Marcus turned to look at me. Our eyes met across the conference table. Sam, he said, and his voice cracked. Why? Why would you do this? I stood up, gathering my folders, and looked down at him. You stole my life's work, I said quietly. You betrayed me with my best friend. You forced me to sign away my rights. And then you endangered patients, killed patients, because you were too arrogant to admit you didn't understand the science. Did you really think I would just let you get away with it? But you signed the NDA, he said desperately. You agreed, I signed the NDA, I agreed. But you made a mistake, Marcus. You assumed I would never have an opportunity to tell the truth. You assumed that your lawyers were smarter than me. You assumed that I would just fade away quietly. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. You forgot that I'm brilliant, I said. That's what you loved about me, remember? That's what you stole from me. My brilliance, my innovation, my ability to solve impossible problems. I straightened up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. So I solved this problem, I said. Figured out exactly how to destroy you completely legally without ever violating the NDA. I created a situation where I would be subpoenaed, where I would have no choice but to tell the truth, where your own greed and stupidity would provide all the evidence needed to bury you. I started walking toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Marcus, that cancer treatment, the one you've been telling investors will be ready for market in 2 years, it won't work without the modifications I designed after the initial trials. The modifications I never wrote down, the modifications that exist only in my head. His face went absolutely white. Good luck with your phase 3 trials, I said sweetly. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Then I walked out. Sarah caught up with me in the hallway. That was incredible, she said, her eyes bright. I've been prosecuting financial crimes for years, and I've never seen someone dismantle a case that thoroughly. You handed me everything. I had time to prepare, I said dryly. Still, the detail, the documentation, the timing, it's perfect. They're going to settle, Marcus is going to prison, and Chen Tech is going to be dismantled. You know that, right? I did know that. In fact, I was counting on it. What happens to the treatment? I asked. The patients who need it, they shouldn't suffer because Marcus is a criminal. Sarah nodded. The patents will be invalidated because they were fraudulently obtained. You'll be able to file new patents in your own name. And frankly, after this testimony, you'll have pharmaceutical companies lining up to work with you. You're going to be able to name your price. That was the plan. In my first life, I'd died broke and bitter, with my treatment locked up in legal limbo. In this life, I was going to save lives and get rich doing it. There's one more thing, Sarah said, pulling out a business card. The whistleblower you mentioned, the one from Chen Tech's accounting department, I'm going to need to interview them. Can you put me in touch? I took the card, trying not to smile. I'll see what I can do, I said. The news broke that evening. Pharmaceutical CEO arrested in massive fraud scheme, read the headline on CNN. Marcus's mugshot was everywhere. He looked haggard, terrified, nothing like the confident entrepreneur who'd graced magazine covers. Julia had been arrested too. Apparently, the SEC had moved fast once they had my testimony. The insider trading alone was enough to bring charges, and the securities fraud was just icing on the cake. I watched the news from my apartment, not the studio in Queens this time, but a nice 2-bedroom in Brooklyn that I'd rented after selling some consulting work to a biotech firm. In this timeline, I'd never signed the NDA until after I'd already established myself professionally, already built relationships with other companies, already made it impossible for Marcus to blacklist me. The consulting work had started small. A few projects here and there, using knowledge I'd gained in my first life to predict which research directions would be fruitful. I'd published papers under my own name, papers that in my first life had been locked up in Marcus's lab books. I'd built a reputation. By the time Marcus stole my research in this timeline, I wasn't some unknown scientist he could bully. I was Dr. Samantha Chen, rising star in oncology research with connections throughout the industry. I'd still signed the NDA, though, because I'd known, eventually, I would find a way to break it legally. And I'd known that Marcus would give me the ammunition I needed. His greed, his stupidity, his corner cutting. It was all inevitable. I just had to wait for it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Please, we need to talk. I'll give you anything. Just make this stop." Marcus. I deleted the text without responding. Another buzz. This time Julia. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. Please, Sam, I have a daughter now. I can't go to prison. Please." I deleted that one too. In my first life, Julia's daughter, my former goddaughter, the child I'd been promised I would be a part of raising, had grown up wealthy and privileged, never knowing that her mother was a thief and her father was a fraud. In this life, she would grow up knowing the truth. It wasn't the child's fault, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. Julia had made her choices. My phone rang. A real call this time, from a number I recognized. Dr. Elizabeth Park, head of oncology research at Johns Hopkins. "Dr. Chen," she said when I answered. "I've been following the news about Chen Tech. I wanted to reach out personally." "Dr. Park," I said warmly, "it's good to hear from you." "I'd like to offer you a position," she said bluntly. "Full professor, your own lab, unlimited research budget. We want the glioblastoma treatment, and we want you. Name your price." Smiled. This was the third such call I'd received today. MIT, Stanford, and now Johns Hopkins. "I'm flattered," I said, "but I'm actually planning to start my own company. I've had enough of working for other people." There was a pause. Then, "What if we offered you a partnership? You maintain control of your research, you own the patents, we provide the infrastructure and funding. You'd be fully independent." Now, that was interesting. "Send me a proposal," I said. "Let's talk." Marcus's trial started 3 months later. I wasn't required to testify. My deposition had been damning enough. But I attended anyway, sitting in the gallery, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the case. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial fraud, the insider trading, the falsified research records, the patent theft. Marcus's lawyers tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, that Marcus had genuinely believed he'd contributed to the research, that the financial irregularities were accounting errors. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. Marcus was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Julia got 12 years. The Chentech board members who'd participated in the insider trading got various sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years. But the best part, the part that made me smile every time I thought about it, was the civil suit. The families of the patients who'd died in the trials had sued Chentech. During the trial, my original research protocols had been entered into evidence. The comparison between what I'd designed and what Marcus had implemented was damning. The jury awarded $500 million in damages. Chentech declared bankruptcy. Every asset was liquidated. And because Marcus and Julia had signed personal guarantees on some of the company's debts, they lost everything. The penthouse, the cars, the vacation homes, the art collection, all of it gone. Julia's daughter went to live with Julia's mother. I felt a pang of sympathy for the child, but only a pang. She'd be okay. Better to grow up middle class with a loving grandmother than wealthy with parents who were criminals. 2 years after the trial, I launched my own company, Chen Therapeutics. The name was deliberate. Let them Google Chen and pharmaceuticals and find my company, my success. Let the world know that the real Chen who mattered was me. My glioblastoma treatment, refined, improved, with all the safety protocols intact, went into phase 3 trials. The results were extraordinary. 89% tumor reduction, minimal side effects, projected 5-year survival rates that were unprecedented. The FDA fast-tracked approval. By the time the treatment hit the market, Chen Therapeutics was valued at $4 billion, 4 times what Chentech had been worth at its peak. I took the company public on the 5-year anniversary of the day I'd woken up reborn. The IPO was oversubscribed within hours. By the end of the first day of trading, my personal net worth was $2.3 billion. I was on the cover of Forbes, the scientist who saved herself. The article detailed everything: the theft, the betrayal, the lawsuit, the triumph. I was open about all of it. I wanted the world to know what Marcus had done. I wanted every business school to teach this as a case study in corporate fraud. I wanted every woman who'd ever been underestimated to know that you could fight back and win. The reporter asked me if I ever regretted signing the NDA. I laughed. Not for a second, I said. That NDA gave Marcus just enough rope to hang himself. He thought it made him safe. He thought it meant I could never tell the truth. But all it did was force him to underestimate me. And that was his biggest mistake. I visited Marcus once, about 3 years into his sentence. He'd aged badly. Prison had been hard on him. He was thinner, grayer, with a haunted look in his eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked when they brought him to the visiting room. "Closure," I said simply. He laughed bitterly. "Closure? You destroyed my life, took everything I built, put me in prison for 20 years, and now you want closure?" "Everything you stole," I corrected. "I didn't destroy your life, Marcus. You destroyed mine. I just got it back." "I loved you," he said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I really did, Sam. I got caught up in it all. The money, the success, the attention. Julia made it so easy, and you were always so focused on the work, and You just what?" I asked coldly. "You just betrayed me? You just stole my research? You just lied to investors and endangered patients?" "I'm sorry," he whispered. "If I could go back—" "But you can't," I interrupted. "And even if you could, you'd make the same choices. Because you're not actually sorry, Marcus. You're just sorry you got caught." I stood up to leave. "Wait," he said desperately. "Sam, please. I know I don't deserve anything, but Julia's daughter, Lily, she needs someone to look after her. Julia's mother is sick, and there's no one else, and—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. "Lily is not my responsibility," I said quietly. "She's not my goddaughter anymore. That privilege was forfeited the day her mother betrayed me. Julia made her choices. You made yours. And now Lily has to live with the consequences." I paused, then added, "But I did set up a trust fund for her education. It'll pay for college, graduate school if she wants it, because she didn't choose her parents, and every child deserves a chance." Marcus stared at me. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness," I said. "I'm not doing this for you or Julia. I'm doing it because I'm not a monster. Unlike you, I don't punish innocent people for other people's crimes." I walked to the door, then looked back one last time. "Enjoy the next 17 years, Marcus," I said. "I know I will." On the 10th anniversary of my rebirth, I threw a party. It was a small gathering. My research team, a few close friends I'd made in this timeline, Dr. Park from Johns Hopkins, and Sarah Kim, who'd become a genuine friend over the years. We were celebrating the approval of Chen Therapeutics' third cancer treatment, this one for pancreatic cancer, another disease with historically poor survival rates. As I stood on my penthouse balcony, looking out over Manhattan, Sarah came to stand beside me. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that subpoena?" she asked. I sipped my champagne and smiled. "I would have found another way," I said. "That was always the plan. The subpoena was just the most elegant solution." Sarah laughed. "You're terrifying, you know that?" "Only to people who cross me," I said lightly. "What's next for you?" she asked. "You've built an empire, destroyed your enemies, saved thousands of lives. What do you do for an encore?" I thought about that. In my first life, I'd died at 34 with nothing but regrets. In this life, I was 38 and just getting started. "I'm going to cure cancer," I said simply. "All of it. Every type. I'm going to make sure that no one else has to go through what I went through in my first life. No one else should have to die young and broke and forgotten." Sarah raised her glass. "To curing cancer, then?" "To curing cancer," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. As the sun set over the city, I thought about Marcus in his cell, Julia in hers, and all the patients whose lives I'd saved. I thought about the NDA I'd signed, the subpoena that had freed me, and the perfect revenge I'd orchestrated. And I smiled, because in the end, they'd tried to silence me. They'd tried to steal my work, my reputation, my future. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing. I was brilliant. And brilliance, when backed into a corner, becomes dangerous. They'd given me a contract that said I couldn't speak, so I'd engineered a situation where the law demanded I speak. They'd tried to bury me. Instead, they'd buried themselves. And I had never felt more alive. 15 years after my rebirth, Chen Therapeutics announced a breakthrough, a universal cancer treatment that targeted the fundamental mechanisms of cellular mutation. It wasn't a cure, not quite, but it was close. Survival rates jumped to 95% across nearly all cancer types. I won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. The award ceremony was in Stockholm, and the hall was packed with scientists, dignitaries, and press from around the world. As I walked to the podium to accept the award, I thought about that studio apartment in Queens, about dying at 34, about the first time I'd woken up with a second chance. Dr. Chen, the presenter said, your work has saved millions of lives and revolutionized cancer treatment. What would you like to say? I looked out at the audience, at Dr. Park, beaming with pride, at Sarah, who'd flown in from New York to attend, at the survivors, dozens of them, who'd come to the ceremony to thank me in person. I'd like to dedicate this award to everyone who's ever been underestimated, I said. Everyone who's been told they're not smart enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough. Everyone who's been betrayed and stolen from and silenced. I paused, emotion catching in my throat. They tried to take everything from me, I said. My work, my future, my voice. They made me sign away my rights. They thought they'd won. I smiled. But they forgot that brilliance can't be stolen. Innovation can't be locked away. And the truth, eventually, always finds a way to be heard. The applause was deafening. Later, at the reception, a young woman approached me. She was thin, pale, with a scarf wrapped around her head where her hair had fallen out from chemotherapy. Dr. Chen, she said, I just wanted to thank you. Your treatment saved my life. I have glioblastoma, the same kind you first developed your treatment for. Without your work, I would have died 2 years ago. Instead, I'm cancer-free. I hugged her, this stranger who I'd saved without ever knowing her name. You're welcome, I whispered. This is why I did it. This is what it was all for. She pulled back, tears in her eyes. I read about what happened to you, how your husband stole your work. I'm so sorry you went through that. Don't be sorry, I said. If it hadn't happened, I might never have fought so hard. I might never have built this company, developed these treatments. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest triumphs. She nodded and walked away, back to her family who waited nearby. A husband, 2 small children, a whole life she'd almost lost. That was what Marcus had tried to steal from people like her. Not just my work, but the lives it could save. I'd made sure he failed. 20 years after my rebirth, I stepped down as CEO of Chen Therapeutics. Not because I was retiring, I was only 48, with decades of research still ahead of me, but because the company had grown beyond me. It had facilities in 17 countries, employed over 50,000 people, and had treatments in development for diseases beyond cancer. I stayed on as Chief Scientific Officer, focusing on research rather than business. That was what I'd always loved anyway. Julia was released from prison that year. She'd served 12 years, gotten out early for good behavior. She was 62 years old, her beauty faded, her health destroyed by prison. She wrote me a letter. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Dear Sam, it began, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. What we did to you was unforgivable. I destroyed our friendship for a man who wasn't worth it, and I helped him steal your life's work. I've had 20 years to think about it, and I still don't fully understand why I did it. Jealousy, maybe, or insecurity, or just pure selfishness. I know you set up a fund for Lily. My mother told me before she died. Thank you for that. You didn't have to, and it meant everything. Lily graduated from college last year, NYU, studying biochemistry. She wants to be a scientist like you. She says you're her hero, even though she's never met you. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I spend every day thinking about what I destroyed. Not just your work, but our friendship. You were the best friend I ever had, and I threw it away for nothing. I hope you're happy. I hope you've found peace. You deserve every bit of success you've achieved. I'm sorry. Julia. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer. A week later, I replied, Julia, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the apology, though you're right. I can't forgive what you did. Some betrayals are too deep, but I can acknowledge that you've served your time and paid your debt to society. I can wish you well in rebuilding your life, whatever that looks like. Regarding Lily, if she applies to do her graduate work at Chen Therapeutics' research fellowship program, she'll be considered on her merits, same as anyone else. Her parents' crimes won't be held against her, but she won't get special treatment either. I hope you find peace too, Julia. I hope you've learned something from all this. Sam? I never heard from her again. I didn't expect to. Marcus was released after serving 18 years. By then, he was 71 years old. Plus, his family had disowned him. His reputation was destroyed. He had nothing and no one. I heard through the grapevine that he was living in a halfway house in New Jersey, working as a janitor at a community college. Part of me, the part that still remembered loving him, felt a flicker of pity. The rest of me felt nothing at all. He'd made his choices. He'd lived with the consequences. That was justice. On my 60th birthday, I woke up in my penthouse apartment and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, laugh lines, reading glasses perched on my nose. I looked successful, happy, at peace. In my first life, I'd never made it to 60. I died at 34, bitter and broken. In this life, I'd lived. I'd built an empire, saved millions of lives, changed the world. And I'd done it all because one time I'd signed a confidentiality agreement, knowing that eventually I'd find a way to break it, knowing that the truth always finds a way. My phone rang. It was my assistant. Chen, the team is ready for you. We have those phase 1 results you wanted to review. I'll be right there, I said. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. There was work to do, always work to do, lives to save, futures to protect, truth to uncover. And I had all the time in the world to do it. Because I'd won, not just against Marcus and Julia, not just in court or in business. I'd won against death itself. I'd been given a second chance, and I'd used it to build something beautiful and important and lasting. They'd tried to silence me. Instead, they'd given me a voice that would echo through history. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.